Quebec says it is prepared to go to court to prevent Ottawa from destroying long gun registry data. Public Security Minister Robert Dutil made the announcement this morning, flanked by police associations, gun control advocates, and women's groups. Quebec wants to set up its own registry, but says the federal data is crucial because creating a registry from scratch would be too expensive. The federal government has pledged to destroy the data when it eliminates the federal long gun registry. Joining me now is Senator Roméo Dallaire, a former Lieutenant General, of course, and a renowned humanitarian. He's here to talk about why the long gun registry should be preserved. And Senator, let's start with that. Quebec has said we want to hold on to this data. The federal government saying we just want a majority government. We've campaigned 4 times on this issue that we're going to get rid of this thing. Why shouldn't the Conservative federal government proceed on what they campaigned on, which is getting rid of it all?
I mean, they legally can do that, of course, because the government and they have the authority to do it. The question is that really fair? Is it ethical? Is it responsible in regards to the Canadian public, and in particular to the majority of a area where the people believe that this should be retained? And so it seems to me that we've got a federation here, we've got the provinces, we have a different level of authority. The criminal dimension of it is got to be worked out, of course, with provincial, federal jurisdiction. But I think it's quite appropriate that if a province wants to sustain a capability that when I sat on the National Police Services Advisory Board felt it was a useful tool, and that tool was, maybe if there were flaws in it, or how it was applied, whether the criminal requirements of it were over the top or whether they were enough. All those things were debated, in fact, when they were debating getting rid of it, to totally an inflexible position by the government of saying, we're going to scrap it, end it, get out of my life.
Solomon Friedman is in our newsroom, and he's a criminal lawyer and has an interest in this issue as well, but from the point of view of saying, no, let the federal government proceed with its plan. And Solomon, let me turn the question a bit around from the one that I had with Senator Dallaire, and that is that though the Conservatives want a majority government, Conservatives generally prefer decisions made by local government, decentralized stuff. Provinces should have rights that they ought to be able to exercise. And in this case, here's a province that seems pretty clear on having its gun registry operational. Why shouldn't the federal government assist a province doing what it wants to do?
Well, as we know, the basis for government having jurisdiction over gun control is that it's an aspect of the criminal law power. And as we know as well, the federal government has the exclusive jurisdiction to enact criminal law. And what the Conservative government here is doing is not telling a province how to conduct its own business. It's simply saying information that we've collected as part of our criminal law mandate should not be turned over to the provincial governments to create a parallel registry. And I think this is more about gun registry data or a right to information. What it is the federal government saying, we have been on a fundamentally wrong track when it comes to violence and crime in this country. And instead of targeting objects owned by law-abiding individuals, it's time to turn our focus away from that. And what we hear from the Quebec government with their fancy press conference, victims advocates and police groups is saying, no, we want to continue wasting precious resources on objects and law-abiding individuals instead of addressing the core causes of crime. And that's the fundamental issue here.
But even if we go back to that, this democratic accountability, as I was just saying to Senator Dallaire, the Conservatives can quite rightly say, hey, we got a majority, we're going to proceed to do what we campaigned on. Conservatives didn't do so well in Quebec. In fact, they did very poorly, and the party that did very well would like to keep the gun registry, the New Democrats and the provincial Liberals. So again, we come back to, do we let a democracy function at a provincial level, or do we do what big bad Ottawa wants to do all the time?
Well, the way our Constitution is set up is that the federal government wins a mandate from the country as a whole, the total number of seats in the House of Commons. I don't think anyone argues that because a particular party did better or worse in one province gives it more or less democratic legitimacy there. The Conservative Party of Canada forms the government of Canada, and the gun registry data was collected by the federal government under its mandate to enact legislation pursuant to the criminal law power. The province of Quebec can't simply play sour grapes now and say, we elected more NDP MPs than Conservative MPs. That's not the way our Constitution is fundamentally set up.
So no asymmetrical federalism on the gun registry. Senator Dallaire, let me bring you in, because of course folks who don't like the idea of the gun registry make the argument that it doesn't do anything. It wouldn't have prevented Marc Lépine from doing what he did at Polytechnique. It doesn't prevent crime. And you've heard this trotted out that it's just legal, law-abiding gun owners are the only ones who have to go through all this process.
If it was so useless, if it was so absolutely ineffective, then how come there was so much use of it? That is to say that it was available, that the police forces in the vast majority, and I remember when they were debating it even in the Senate, that the government had paraded all kinds of people that said that they didn't want it, from hunters to all other types of people who use the weapons, to people who just do training and practice shooting and so on. So, I mean, each side has argued. My position that I believe, and certainly the party believes, is that you've created a capability here on a system which are weapons, live weapons that have a capability of endangering people's lives, and you wanted to establish a control of that in a responsible way. Now, whether or not it has to be criminal at that level, we introduced amendments to make it less sort of in-your-face responsible, yet still counting on the sense of responsibility of the population, and that wasn't accepted. So I think that it's quite appropriate that the police forces, who are the ones who ultimately may be facing those weapons, maybe, and the question is how many casualties are too many? 1? A dozen? 14 out of Polytechnique? And so I would contend that any such capabilities in the hands that are not sort of controlled or at least monitored and that are responsible sort of process put in place is inappropriate in a well-structured society like ours.
Solomon, do you have a thought about the Senator's comments there?
Well, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the gun registry having received support from the upper ranks, that's the Association of Chiefs of Police, etc., there was a wide disconnect between what rank and file members, those are the individuals who are allegedly going to be using this database on a daily basis, said about it, and what their politically appointed chiefs of police throughout the country said. And what Parliament heard, in particular in the committee hearings about Bill C-19, the bill to scrap the long gun registry, from rank and file ordinary police officers was, this does not only not make us safe, reliance on this data makes us unsafe. For officers to assume that just because a registry check on a home has come up clear means there are no weapons there, actually, as opposed to making officers safe, puts officers' lives in danger on a daily basis. And I think that it's incumbent upon those who support the gun registry to show one single life that's been saved by it. We're $2 billion later, and no one can point to a single case and say the gun registry prevented that tragedy. All we can do is point to tragedies and say the gun registry was there and did absolutely nothing. At a certain point, you need to cut your losses and say enough is enough.
Well, yeah, so let's prove that going 30 kilometers an hour in a zone has saved so many lives, and that's why we put 30 instead of 50 kilometers. I mean, how can you go into a process where it might be effective and it is implementing that might prevent, and put that into a sort of scrutiny of putting some metrics to that and say, you know, it saved so many or didn't save so many, and so it's useful or not. I simply go under the premise that these are weapons. Whether you use them for hunting, whether you use them for target practice or in the military, they're weapons. And in that context, a society like ours should have an access to knowing where they are and who's got them.
Just quickly, I'm curious about this one aspect of the story, in that this is really a Quebec story. Well, I don't think we've seen the heat and fury about the gun registry disappearing in the rest of Canada. Why do you think it's been so unique to Quebec, that the Quebec government's acted?
Well, I think that just as Mr. Solomon was indicating, we're made up of a whole series of different provinces with cultural differences, you know, and different emphasis, more rural, less rural, urban, and the like. And I would contend that there is an aversion into weapons that is maybe more pronounced in Quebec than other places, although there's a lot of hunting and going on in that province. However, there might be other provinces that are not coming forward because maybe they're not in a position to do that. You know, facing the rural vote. You know, Ontario, you got a minority government. BC, they've got an election coming. So some of them may be simply hedging their bets, and Quebec is la fer de lance into trying to see whether we'll get through with this or not.
Solomon, last quick question for you, a legal beagle question. This lawsuit that's going to be launched, are there any interesting legal issues here, the sort of thing that at some point in time, Federal Court of Appeal or Supreme Court of Canada might want to get in on?
Well, I think at some point we're going to need to deal very early on with the issue of the constitutional jurisdiction to enact a gun registry. However, at this point, it's entirely speculative. The government of Quebec may make pronouncements about how they intend to challenge the destruction of gun registry data, but they haven't told us how they intend to do that. And most importantly, they haven't told us under which statute or under which part of the Constitution they intend to challenge that. What we're hearing right now is words and threats of action towards lawsuit. We haven't seen any actual filings or lawsuits at this point. And I think it's really too early to comment before seeing how exactly does Quebec intend to force the federal government down a path of folly that the majority of Canadians in the last election have rejected. Canadians have rejected wholeheartedly the notion that law-abiding citizens are for some reason responsible for the acts of gun-wielding madmen. If Quebec wants to go down that path, there's no reason why the federal government should support them by providing gun registry data.
I think it's fascinating. You vote for a party, and that means you voted for the omnibus of everything that party stands for. That would be quite revealing to me who's been voting for over 40 years, because I've never voted with that context. I know that there are things I like, don't like, and I'll balance it out and then decide. But it doesn't give carte blanche for everything they stand for, meaning that I support it.
That's why we have the Senate, Senator Dallaire. Thank you so much.
I certainly hope so.
Yes. Senator Roméo Dallaire, thank you. And Solomon Friedman in our Zoom, thank you. A very interesting discussion, guys.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Senator Dallaire.
Yeah, fine.